Part 3, Chapter 11 of Nostromo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mario Pineda. Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. Part 3, The Lighthouse. Chapter 11. Sulaco outstripped Nostromo's prudence, growing rich swiftly on the hidden treasures of the earth, hovered over by the anxious spirits of good and evil, turned out by the laboring hands of the people. It was like a second youth, like a new life, full of promise, of unrest, of toil, scattering lavishly its wealth to the four corners of an excited world. Material changes swept along the train of material interests, and other changes, more subtle, outwardly unmarked, affected the minds and hearts of the workers. Captain Mitchell had gone home to live on his savings invested in the San Tome mine, and Dr. Monygham had grown older, with his head still grey, and the unchanged expression of his face, living on the inexhaustible treasure of his devotion drawn upon in the secret of his heart like a store of unlawful wealth. The Inspector General of State Hospitals, whose maintenance is in charge upon the Gould concession, official advisor on sanitation to the municipality, chief medical officer of the San Tome Consolidated Mines, whose territory containing gold, silver, copper, lead, cobalt, extends for miles along the foothills of the Cordillera, had felt poverty-stricken, miserable, and starved during the prolonged second visit the Goulds paid to Europe and the United States of America. Intimate of the Casa, proved friend, a bachelor without ties and without establishment except of the professional sort, he had been asked to take up his quarters in the Gould house. In the 11 months of their absence the familiar rooms, recalling at every glance the woman to whom he had given all his loyalty, had grown intolerable. As the day approached for the arrival of the mail boat Hermes, the latest addition to the O.S.N. Co.'s splendid fleet, the doctor hobbled about more vivaciously, snapped more sardonically at Simple and Gentle out of sheer nervousness. He packed up his mother's trunk, and with speed, with fury, with enthusiasm, and saw it carried out past the old porter at the gate of the Casa Gould, with delight, with intoxication. Then, as the hour approached, sitting alone in the great landau, behind the white mules, a little sideways, his drawn-in face positively venomous with the effort of self-control, and holding a pair of new gloves in his left hand, he drove to the harbour. His heart dilated within him so, when he saw the Goulds on the deck of the Hermes, that his greetings were reduced to a casual mutter. Driving back to town, all three were silent, and in the patio the doctor, in a more natural manner, said, "I'll leave you now to yourselves. I'll call tomorrow, if I may." "Come to lunch, dear Dr. Monygham, and come early," said Mrs. Gould, in her travelling dress and her veil down, turning to look at him at the foot of the stairs. While at the top of the flight the Madonna, in blue robes and the child on her arm, seemed to welcome her with an aspect of pitying tenderness. "Don't expect to find me at home," Charles Gould warned him. "I'll be off early to the mine." After lunch, Doña Emilia and the Señor Doctor came slowly through the inner gateway of the patio. The large gardens of the Casa Gould, surrounded by high walls, and the red tiled slopes of neighbouring roofs, lay open before them, with masses of shade under the trees and level surfaces of sunlight upon the lawns. A triple row of old orange trees surrounded the whole. Barefooted, brown gardeners, in snowy white shirts and white calzoneras, dotted the grounds, squatting over flower beds, passing between the trees, dragging slender India rubber tubes across the gravel of the paths. And the fine jets of water crossed each other in graceful curves, sparkling in the sunshine, with a slight pattering noise upon the bushes and an effect of shower diamonds upon the grass. Doña Emilia, holding up the train of a clear dress, walked by the side of Dr. Monygham in a longish black coat and severe black bow on an immaculate shirt-front. Under a shady clump of trees, where stood scattered little tables and wicker easy chairs, Mrs. Gould sat down in a low and ample seat. "Don't go yet," she said to Dr. Monygham, who was unable to tear himself away from the spot. His chin nestling within the points of his collar, he devoured her stealthily with his eyes, which luckily were round and hard like clouded marbles, and incapable of disclosing his sentiments. His pitying emotion at the marks of time upon the face of that woman, the air of frailty and weary fatigue that had settled upon the eyes and temples of the never-tired Senora, as Don Pepe years ago used to call her with admiration, touched him almost to tears. "Don't go yet. Today is all my own," Mrs. Gould urged gently. "We are not back yet officially. No one will come. It's only tomorrow that the windows of the Casa Gould are to be lit up for a reception." The doctor dropped into a chair. "Giving a tertulia?" he said with a detached air. "A simple greeting for all the kind friends who care to come." "And only tomorrow?" "Yes. Charles will be tired out after a day at the mine, and so it would be good to have him to myself for one evening on our return to this house I love. It has seen all my life." "Ah, yes," snarled the doctor suddenly. "Women count time from the marriage feast. Didn't you leave a little before?" "Yes, but what is there to remember? There were no cares." Mrs. Gould sighed. And as two friends, after a long separation, will revert to the most agitated period of their lives, they began to talk at the Sulaco Revolution. It seemed strange to Mrs. Gould that people who had taken part in it seemed to forget its memory and its lesson. And yet, struck in the doctor, we who played our part in it had our reward. Don Pepe, though superannuated, still can sit a horse. Barrios is drinking himself to death in jovial company away somewhere on his fundacion beyond the Bolson de Tonoro. And the heroic Father Roman, I imagine the old padre blowing up systematically the San Tome mine, uttering a pious exclamation at every bang, and taking handfuls of snuff between the explosions. The heroic Padre Roman says he's not afraid of the harm whole-race missionaries can do to his flock as long as he is alive. Mrs. Gould shuddered a little at the allusion to the destruction that had come so near to the San Tome mine. "Ah, but you, dear friend?" "I did the work I was fit for." "You faced the most cruel dangers of all, something more than death." "No, Mrs. Gould, only death, by hanging, and I am rewarded beyond my deserts." Noticing Mrs. Gould's gaze fixed upon him, he dropped his eyes. "I've made my career, as you see," said the Inspector General of State Hospitals, taking up lightly the lapels of his superfine black coat. The doctor's self-respect, marked inwardly by the almost complete disappearance from his dreams of Father Beron, appeared visibly in what, by contrast with former carelessness, seemed an immoderate cult of personal appearance. Carried out within severe limits of form and colour, and in perpetual freshness, this change of apparel gave to Dr. Monygham an air at the same time professional and festive, while his gait and the unchanged crabbed character of his face acquired from it a startling force of incongruity. "Yes," he went on, "we all have our rewards. The engineer-in-chief, Captain Mitchell—" "We saw him," interrupted Mrs. Gould in her charming voice. "The poor dear man came up from the country on purpose to call on us in our hotel in London. He comported himself with great dignity, but I fancy he regrets Sulaco. He rambled feebly about historical events, till I felt I could have a cry." Grunted the doctor, "getting old, I suppose. Even Nostromo is getting older, though he is not changed. And, speaking of that fellow, I wanted to tell you something." For some time the house had been full of murmurs, of agitation. Suddenly the two gardeners, busy with rose trees at the side of the garden arch, fell upon their knees with bowed heads on the passage of Antonia Avellanos, who appeared walking beside her uncle. Invested with the red hat after a short visit to Rome, where he had been invited by the propaganda, Father Gorbelin, missionary to the wild Indians, conspirator, friend and patron of Hernandez the robber, advanced with big slow strides, gaunt and leaning forward, with his powerful hands clasped behind his back. The first Cardinal Archbishop of Sulaco had preserved his fanatical and morose air, the aspect of a chaplain of bandits. It was believed that his unexpected elevation to the purple was a counter-move to the Protestant invasion of Sulaco organized by the Holroyd Missionary Fund. Antonia, the beauty of her face as if a little blurred, her figure slightly fuller, advanced with her light walk and her high serenity, smiling from a distance at Mr. Gould. She had brought her uncle over to see dear Emilia, without ceremony, just for a moment before the siesta. When all were seated again, Dr. Monygham, who had come to dislike heartily everybody who approached Mrs. Gould with any intimacy, kept aside, pretending to be lost in profound meditation. A louder phrase of Antonia made him lift his head. How can we abandon, groaning under oppression, those who have been our countrymen only a few years ago, who are our countrymen now? Miss Avellanos was saying. How can we remain blind and deaf, without pity to the cruel wrongs suffered by our brothers? There's a remedy. Annex the rest of Costaguana to the order and prosperity of Sulaco, snapped the doctor. There is no other remedy. I am convinced, Senor Doctor, Antonia said, with the earnest calm of invincible resolution, that this was from the first poor Martin's intention. Yes, but the material interests will not let you jeopardize their development for a mere idea of pity and justice, the doctor muttered grumpily. And it is just as well, perhaps. The Cardinal Archbishop straightened up his gaunt, bony frame. We have worked for them. We have made them. These material interests of the foreigners. The last of the Corbellans uttered in a deep, denunciatory tone. And without them you're nothing, cried the doctor from the distance. They will not let you. Let them beware, then, lest the people, prevented from their aspirations, should rise and claim their share of the wealth and their share of the power, the popular Cardinal Archbishop of Sulaco declared, significantly, menacingly. A silence ensued, during which His Eminence stared, frowning at the ground, and Antonia, graceful and rigid in her chair, breathed calmly in the strength of her convictions. Then the conversation took a social turn, touching on the visit of the Goulds to Europe. The Cardinal Archbishop, when in Rome, had suffered from neuralgia in the head all the time. It was the climate, the bad air. When uncle and niece had gone away, with the servants again falling on their knees, and the old porter who had known Henry Gould, almost totally blind and impotent now, creeping up to kiss His Eminence's extended hand, Dr. Monygham, looking after them, pronounced the one word. Incorrigible. Mrs. Gould, with a look upwards, dropped wearily on her lap, her white hands flashing with the gold and stones of many rings. Conspiring, yes, said the doctor. The last of the Avellanos and the last of the Corbellans are conspiring with the refugees from Santa Marta that flock here after every revolution. The Café Lambroso at the corner of the plaza is full of them. You can hear their chatter across the street like the noise of a parrot house. They are conspiring for the invasion of Costaguana. And do you know where they go for strength, for the necessary force? To the secret societies amongst immigrants and natives, where Nostromo, I should say Captain Fidanza, is the great man. What gives him that position? Who can say? Genius? He has genius. He is greater with the populace than ever he has before. It is as if he had some secret power, some mysterious means to keep up his influence. He holds conferences with the Archbishop as in those old days which you and I remember. Barrios is useless. But for a military head they have the pious Hernandez. And they may raise the country with the new cry of the wealth for the people. Will there be never any peace? Will there be no rest? Mrs. Gould whispered. I thought that we... No, interrupted the doctor. There is no peace and no rest in the development of material interests. They have their law and their justice, but it is founded on expediency, and is inhuman. It is without rectitude, without the continuity and the force that can be found only in a moral principle. Mrs. Gould, the time approaches when all that the Gould concession stands for shall weigh as heavily upon the people as the barbarism, cruelty, and misrule of a few years back. How can you say that, Dr. Monygham? She cried out, as if hurt in the most sensitive place of her soul. I can say what is true, the doctor insisted obstinately. It'll weigh as heavily and provoke resentment, bloodshed, and vengeance, because the men have grown different. Do you think that now the mine would march upon the town to save their Senor Administrador? Do you think that? She pressed the backs of her entwined hands on her eyes and murmured hopelessly. Is it this we have worked for, then? The doctor lowered his head. He could follow her silent thought. Was it for this that her life had been robbed of all the intimate felicities of daily affection which her tenderness needed as the human body needs air to breathe? And the doctor, indignant with Charles Gould's blindness, hastened to change the conversation. It is about Nostromo that I wanted to talk to you. Ah, that fellow has some continuity and force. Nothing will put an end to him. But never mind that. There is something inexplicable going on, or perhaps only too easy to explain, you know. Linda is practically the lighthouse keeper of the Great Isabel Light. The Garibaldino is too old now. His part is to clean the lamps and to cook in the house. But he can't get up the stairs any longer. The black-eyed Linda sleeps all day and watches the light all night. Not all day, though. She is up towards 5 in the afternoon, when our Nostromo, wherever he is in harbor with his schooner, comes out of his curtain visit, pulling in a small boat. Aren't they married yet? Mrs. Gould asked. The mother wished it, as far as I can understand, while Linda was quite a child. When I had the girls with me for a year or so during the war of separation, that extraordinary Linda used to declare quite simply that she was going to be Gian Battista's wife. They are not married yet, said the doctor curtly. I have looked after them a little. Thank you, dear Dr. Monygham, said Mrs. Gould, and under the shade of the big trees her little even teeth gleamed in the youthful smile of gentle malice. People don't know how really good you are. You will not let them know, as if on purpose to annoy me, who have put my faith in your good heart long ago. The doctor, with a lifting up of his upper lip, as though he were longing to bite, bowed stiffly in his chair, with the utter absorption of a man to whom love comes late, not as the most splendid of illusions, but like an enlightening and priceless misfortune. The sight of that woman, of whom he had been deprived for nearly a year, suggested ideas of adoration, of kissing the hem of her robe. And this excess of feeling translated itself naturally into an augmented grimness of speech. I am afraid of being overwhelmed by too much gratitude. However, these people interest me. I went out several times to the Great Isabel Light to look after old Giorgio. He did not tell Mrs. Gould that it was because he found there, in her absence, the relief of an atmosphere of congenial sentiment in old Giorgio's austere admiration for the English Signora, the benefactress, in black-eyed Linda's voluble, torrential, passionate affection for our Dona Emilia, that angel, in the white-throated, fair Giselle's adoring upward turn of the eyes, which then glided towards him with a sidelong half-arch, half-candid glance, which made the doctor exclaim to himself mentally, "If I weren't what I am, old and ugly, I would think the minx is making eyes at me. And perhaps she is. I dare say she would make eyes at anybody." Dr. Monygham said nothing of this to Mrs. Gould, the providence of the Viola family, but reverted to what he called our great Nostromo. What I wanted to tell you is this. Our great Nostromo did not take much notice of the old man and the children for some years. It's true, too, that he was away on his coasting voyages certainly 10 months out of the 12. He was making his fortune, as he told Captain Mitchell once. He seems to have done uncommonly well. It was only to be expected. He is a man full of resource, full of confidence in himself, ready to take chances and risks of every sort. I remember being in Mitchell's office one day when he came in with that calm, grave air he always carries everywhere. He had been away trading in the Gulf of California, he said, looking straight past us at the wall, as his manner is, and was glad to see on his return that a lighthouse was being built on the cliff of the Great Isabel. Very glad, he repeated. Mitchell explained that it was the O.S.N. Co. who was building it for the convenience of the mail service, on his own advice. Captain Fidanza was good enough to say that it was excellent advice. I remember him twisting up his moustaches and looking all round the cornice of the room before he proposed that old Giorgio should be made the keeper of that light. I heard of this. I was consulted at the time, Mr. Gould said. I doubted whether it would be good for these girls to be shut up on that island, as if in a prison. The proposal fell in with the old Garibaldino's humour. As to Linda, any place was lovely and delightful enough for her as long as it was Nostromo's suggestion. She could wait for her giant Battista's good pleasure there as well as anywhere else. My opinion is that she was always in love with that incorruptible capataz. Moreover, both father and sister were anxious to get Giselle away from the attentions of a certain Ramirez. Ah, said Mrs. Gould, interested. Ramirez? What sort of man is that? Just a mozo of the town. His father was a cargador. As a lanky boy he ran about the wharf in rags till Nostromo took him up and made a man of him. When he got a little older, he put him into a lighter and very soon gave him charge of the number 3 boat, the boat which took the silver away. Mrs. Gould. Nostromo selected that lighter for the work because she was the best sailing and the strongest boat of all the company's fleet. John Ramirez was one of the 5 cargadores entrusted with the removal of the treasure from the custom house on that famous night. As the boat he had charge of was sunk, Nostromo, on leaving the company's service, recommended him to Captain Mitchell for his successor. He had trained him in the routine of work perfectly, and thus Mr. Ramirez, from a starving waif, becomes a man and the capataz of the Sulaco cargadores. Thanks to Nostromo, said Mrs. Gould with warm approval. Thanks to Nostromo, repeated Dr. Monygham. Upon my word, the fellow's power frightens me when I think of it. That our poor old Mitchell was only too glad to appoint somebody trained to the work who saved him trouble is not surprising. What is wonderful is the fact that the Sulaco cargadores accepted Ramirez for their chief, simply because such was Nostromo's good pleasure. Of course, he is not a second Nostromo, as he fondly imagined he would be, but still the position was brilliant enough. It emboldened him to make up to Giselle Viola, who, you know, is the recognized beauty of the town. The old Garibaldino, however, took a violent dislike to him. I don't know why. Perhaps because he was not a model of perfection like his Gian Battista, the incarnation of the courage, the fidelity, the honor of the people. Signor Viola does not think much of Sulaco natives. Both of them, the old Spartan and that white-faced Linda, with her red mouth and coal black eyes, were looking rather fiercely after the fair one. Ramirez was warned off. Father Viola, I'm told, threatened him with his gun once. But what of Giselle herself? Asked Mr. Gould. She is a bit of a flirt, I believe, said the doctor. I don't think she cared much one way or another. Of course she likes men's attentions. Ramirez was not the only one, let me tell you, Mrs. Gould. There was one engineer, at least, on the railway staff who got warned off with a gun too. Old Viola does not allow any trifling with his honour. He has grown uneasy and suspicious since his wife died. He was very pleased to remove his youngest girl away from the town. But look what happens, Mr. Gould. Ramirez, the honest, lovelorn swain, is forbidden the island. Very well. He respects the prohibition, but naturally turns his eyes frequently towards the great Isabel. It seems as though he had been in the habit of gazing late at night upon the light. And during these sentimental vigils he discovers that Nostromo, Captain Fidanza, that is, returns very late from his visits to the Violas, as late as midnight at times. The doctor paused and stared meaningly at Mrs. Gould. Yes, but I don't understand, she began, looking puzzled. Now comes the strange part, went on Dr. Monygham. Viola, who is king of his island, will allow no visitor on it after dark. Even Captain Fidanza has got to leave after sunset, when Linda has gone up to tend the light. And Nostromo goes away obediently. But what happens afterwards? What does he do in the Gulf between 6:30 and midnight? He has been seen more than once at that late hour pulling quietly into the harbour. Ramirez is devoured by jealousy. He dared not approach old Viola, but he plucked up courage to rail at Linda about it on Sunday morning as she came on the mainland to hear mass and visit her mother's grave. There was a scene on the wharf which, as a matter of fact, I witnessed. It was early morning. He must have been waiting for her on purpose. I was there by the merest chance, having been called to an urgent consultation by the doctor of the German gunboat in the harbour. She poured wrath, scorn, and flame upon Ramirez, who seemed out of his mind. It was a strange sight, Mr. Gould. The long jetty, with this raving cargador in his crimson sash, and the girl all in black, at the end. The early Sunday morning quiet of the harbour in the shade of the mountains. Nothing but a canoe or two moving between the ships at anchor, and the German gunboat's gig coming to take me off. Linda passed me within a foot. I noticed her wild eyes. I called out to her. She never heard me. She never saw me. But I looked at her face. It was awful in its anger and wretchedness. Mrs. Gould sat up, opening her eyes very wide. "What do you mean, Dr. Monygham? Do you mean to say that you suspect the younger sister?" "Quien sabe? Who can tell?" said the doctor, shrugging his shoulders like a born Costaguanero. Ramirez came up to me on the wharf. He reeled. He looked insane. He took his head into his hands. He had to talk to someone. Simply had to. Of course, for all his mad state, he recognized me. People know me well here. I have lived too long amongst them to be anything else but the evil-eyed doctor who can cure all the ills of the flesh and bring bad luck by any glance. He came up to me. He tried to be calm. He tried to make it out that he wanted merely to warn me against Nostromo. It seems that Captain Fidanza at some secret meeting or other had mentioned me as the worst despiser of all the poor, of the people. It is very possible. He honours me with his undying dislike. And a word from the great Fidanza might be quite enough to send some fool's knife into my back. The sanitary commission I preside over is not in favour with the populace. Beware of him, Señor Doctor. Destroy him, Señor Doctor, Ramirez hissed right into my face. And then he broke out. That man, he spluttered, has cast a spell upon both these girls. As to himself, he had said too much. He must run away now. Run away and hide somewhere. He moaned tenderly about Giselle, and then called her names that cannot be repeated. If he thought she could be made to love him by any means, he would carry her off from the island. Off into the woods, but it was no good. He strode away, flourishing his arms above his head. Then I noticed an old negro, who had been sitting behind a pile of cases, fishing from the wharf. He wound up his lines and slunk away at once. But he must have heard something and must have talked to, because some of the old Garibaldino's railway friends, I suppose, warned him against Ramirez. At any rate, the father has been warned, but Ramirez has disappeared from the town. "I feel I have a duty towards these girls," said Mr. Gould uneasily. "Is Nostromo in Sulaco now?" "He is, since last Sunday. He ought to be spoken to, at once." "Who will dare speak to him? Even the love-mad Ramirez runs away from the mere shadow of Captain Fidanza." "I can. I will," Mr. Gould declared. "A word will be enough for a man like Nostromo." The doctor smiled sourly. "He must end this situation, which lends itself to... I can't believe it of that child," pursued Mr. Gould. "He's very attractive," muttered the doctor gloomily. "He'll see it, I'm sure. He must put an end to all this by marrying Linda at once," pronounced the first lady of Sulaco with immense decision. Through the garden gate emerged Basilio, ground fat and sleek, with an elderly hairless face, wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, and his jet-black, coarse hair plastered down smoothly. Stooping carefully behind an ornamental clump of bushes, he put down with precaution a small child he had been carrying on his shoulder, his own and Leonarda's last-born. The pudding, spoiled camerista, and the head mozo of the Casa Gould had been married for some years now. He remained squatting on his heels for a time, gazing fondly at his offspring, which returned his stare with imperturbable gravity. Then, solemn and respectable, walked down the path. "What is it, Basilio?" asked Mr. Gould. "A telephone came through from the office of the mine. The master remains to sleep at the mountain tonight." Dr. Monygham had got up and stood looking away. A profound silence reigned for a time under the shade of the biggest trees in the lovely gardens of the Casa Gould. "Very well, Basilio," said Mrs. Gould. She watched him walk away along the path, step aside behind the flowering bush, and reappear with the child seated on his shoulder. He passed through the gateway between the garden and the patio with measured steps, careful of his light burden. The doctor, with his back to Mrs. Gould, contemplated a flower bed away in the sunshine. People believed him scornful and soured. The truth of his nature consisted in his capacity for passion and in the sensitiveness of his temperament. What he lacked was the polished callousness of men of the world, the callousness from which springs an easy tolerance for oneself and others, the tolerance white as poles asunder from true sympathy and human compassion. This want of callousness accounted for his sardonic turn of mind and his biting speeches. In profound silence, and glaring viciously at the brilliant flower bed, Dr. Monygham poured mental imprecations on Charles Gould's head. Behind him the immobility of Mrs. Gould added to the grace of her seated figure the charm of art, of an attitude caught and interpreted for ever. Turning abruptly, the doctor took his leave. Mrs. Gould leaned back at the shade of the big trees planted in a circle. She leaned back with her eyes closed and her white hands lying idle on the arms of her seat. The half-light under the thick mass of leaves brought out the youthful prettiness of her face, made the clear, light fabrics and white lace of her dress appear luminous. Small and dainty, as if radiating light of her own in the deep shade of the interlaced boughs, she resembled a good fairy, weary with a long career of well-doing, touched by the withering suspicion of the uselessness of her labours, the powerlessness of her magic. Had anybody asked her of what she was thinking, alone in the garden of the casa, with her husband at the mine and the house close to the street like an empty dwelling, her frankness would have had to evade the question. It had come into her mind that for life to be large and full, it must contain the care of the past and of the future in every passing moment of the present. Our daily work must be done to the glory of the dead, and for the good of those who come after. She thought that, and sighed without opening her eyes, without moving at all. Mrs. Gould's face became set and rigid for a second, as if to receive, without flinching, a great wave of loneliness that swept over her head. And it came into her mind, too, that no one would ever ask her with solicitude what she was thinking of. No one but perhaps the man who had just gone away. No one who could be answered with careless sincerity in the ideal perfection of confidence. The word incorrigible, a word lately pronounced by Dr. Monygham, floated in her still and sad immobility. Incorrigible in his devotion to the great silver mine was the Señor Administrador. Incorrigible in his hard, determined service of the material interests to which he had pinned his faith in the triumph of order and justice. Poor boy! She had a clear vision of the grey hairs on his temples. He was perfect. Perfect! What more could she have expected? It was a colossal and lasting success, and love was only a short moment of forgetfulness, a short intoxication, whose delight one remembered with a sense of sadness, as if it had been a deep grief lived through. There was something inherent in the necessities of successful action which carried with it the moral degradation of the idea. She saw the San Tome mountain hanging over the Campo, over the whole land, feared, hated, wealthy, more soulless than any tyrant, more pitiless and autocratic than the worst government, ready to crush innumerable lives in the expansion of its greatness. He did not see it. He could not see it. It was not his fault. He was perfect, perfect, but she would never have him to herself. Never, not for one short hour altogether to herself in this old Spanish house she loved so well. Incorrigible, the last of the Corbellans, the last of the Avellanos, the doctor had said. But she saw clearly the San Tome mine possessing, consuming, burning up the life of the last of the Costaguana Goulds, mastering the energetic spirit of the son as it had mastered the lamentable weakness of the father. A terrible success for the last of the Goulds. The last! She had hoped for a long, long time that perhaps... But no! There were to be no more. An immense desolation, the dread of her own continued life, descended upon the First Lady of Sulaco. With a prophetic vision she saw herself surviving alone, the degradation of her young ideal of life, of love, of work, all alone in the treasure house of the world. The profound, blind, suffering expression of a painful dream settled on her face with its closed eyes. In the indistinct voice of an unlucky sleeper lying passive in the grip of a merciless nightmare, she stammered out aimlessly the words, "material interest." End of Part 3, Chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Nostromo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mario Pineda. Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. Part 3, The Lighthouse. Chapter 12. Nostromo had been growing rich very slowly. It was an effect of his prudence. He could command himself even when thrown off his balance. And to become the slave of a treasure with full self-knowledge is an occurrence rare and mentally disturbing. But it was also in a great part because of the difficulty of converting it into a form in which it could become available. The mere act of getting it away from the island piecemeal, little by little, was surrounded by difficulties, by the dangers of imminent detection. He had to visit the Great Isabel in secret between his voyages along the coast, which were the ostensible source of his fortune. The crew of his own schooner were to be feared as if they had been spies upon their dreaded captain. He did not dare stay too long in port. When his coaster was unloaded, he hurried away on another trip, for he feared arousing suspicion even by a day's delay. Sometimes during a week's stay or more he could only manage one visit to the treasure. And that was all. A couple of ingots. He suffered through his fears as much as through his prudence. To do things by stealth humiliated him, and he suffered most from the concentration of his thought upon the treasure. A transgression, a crime, entering a man's existence, eats it up like a malignant growth, consumes it like a fever. Nostromo had lost his peace. The genuineness of all his qualities was destroyed. He felt it himself, and often cursed the silver of San Tome. His courage, his magnificence, his leisure, his work, everything was as before, only everything was a sham. But the treasure was real. He clung to it with a more tenacious mental grip. But he hated the feel of the ingots. Sometimes, after putting away a couple of them in his cabin, the fruit of a secret night expedition to the Great Isabel, he would look fixedly at his fingers, as if surprised they had left no stain on his skin. He had found means of disposing of the silver bars in distant ports. The necessity to go far afield made his coasting voyages long, and caused his visits to the Viola household to be rare and far between. He was fated to have his wife from there. He had said so once to Giorgio himself, but the Garibaldino had put the subject aside with a majestic wave of his hand, clutching a smouldering black briar root pipe. There was plenty of time. He was not the man to force his girls upon anybody. As time went on, Nostromo discovered his preference for the younger of the two. They had some profound similarities of nature which must exist for complete confidence and understanding, no matter what outward differences of temperament there might be to exercise their own fascination of contrast. His wife would have to know his secret, or else life would be impossible. He was attracted by Giselle, with her candid gaze and white throat, pliable, silent, fond of excitement under her quiet indolence, whereas Linda, with her intense, passionately pale face, energetic, all fire and words, touched with gloom and scorn, a chip of the old block, true daughter of the austere republican, but with Teresa's voice, inspired him with a deep-seated mistrust. Moreover, the poor girl could not conceal her love for Gian Battista. He could see it would be violent, exacting, suspicious, uncompromising, like her soul. Giselle, by her fair but warm beauty, by the surface placidity of her nature holding a promise of submissiveness, by the charm of her girlish mysteriousness, excited his passion and allayed his fears as to the future. His absences from Sulaco were long. On returning from the longest of them, He made out lighters loaded with blocks of stone lying under the cliff of the Great Isabel, cranes and scaffolding above, workmen's figures moving about, and a small lighthouse already rising from its foundations on the edge of the cliff. At this unexpected, undreamt of, startling sight, he thought himself lost irretrievably. What could save him from detection now? Nothing. He was struck with amazed dread at this turn of chance that would kindle a far-reaching light upon the only secret spot of his life, that life whose very essence, value, reality consisted in its reflection from the admiring eyes of men. All of it but that thing which was beyond common comprehension, which stood between him and the power that hears and gives effect to the evil intention of curses. It was dark. Not every man had such a darkness. And they were going to put a light there. A light! He saw it shining upon disgrace, poverty, contempt. Somebody was sure to... Perhaps somebody had already... The incomparable Nostromo, the capataz, the respected and feared Captain Fidanza, the unquestioned patron of secret societies, a republican like old Giorgio, and a revolutionist at heart, but in another manner, was on the point of jumping overboard from the deck of his own schooner. That man, subjected almost to insanity, looked suicide deliberately in the face. But he never lost his head. He was checked by the thought that this was no escape. He imagined himself dead, and the disgrace, the shame going on. Or rather, properly speaking, he could not imagine himself dead. He was possessed too strongly by the sense of his own existence, a thing of infinite duration in its changes, to grasp the notion of finality. The earth goes on forever. And he was courageous. It was a corrupt courage, but it was as good for his purposes as the other kind. He sailed close to the cliff of the Great Isabel, throwing a penetrating glance from the deck at the mouth of the ravine, tangled in an undisturbed growth of bushes. He sailed close enough to exchange hails with the workmen, shading their eyes on the edge of the sheer drop of the cliff, overhung by the jib head of a powerful crane. He perceived that none of them had an occasion even to approach the ravine where the silver lay hidden, let alone to enter it. On the harbour he learned that no one slept on the island. The labouring gangs returned to port every evening, singing chorus songs in the empty lighters towed by the harbour tug. For the moment he had nothing to fear. But afterwards, he asked himself. Later, when a keeper came to live in the cottage that was being built some 150 yards back from the low light tower, and 400 or so from the dark, shady, jungly ravine, containing the secret of his safety, of his influence, of his magnificence, of his power over the future, of his defiance of ill luck, of every possible betrayal from rich and poor alike, what then? He could never shake off the treasure. His audacity, greater than that of other men, had welded that mine of silver into his life. And the feeling of fearful and ardent subjection, the feeling of his slavery, so irremediable and profound that often in his thoughts he compared himself to the legendary gringos, neither dead nor alive, bound down to the conquest of unlawful wealth on Azuera, weighed heavily on the independent Captain Fidanza, owner and master of a coasting schooner, whose smart appearance and fabulous good luck in trading were so well known along the western seaboard of a vast continent. Fiercely whiskered and graved, a shade less supple in his walk, the vigour and symmetry of his powerful limbs lost in the vulgarity of a brown tweed suit, made by Jews in the slums of London and sold by the clothing department of the Compagnia Anzani, Captain Fidanza was seen in the streets of Sulaco attending to his business as usual that trip. And, as usual, he allowed it to get about that he had made a great profit of his cargo. It was a cargo of salt fish, and Lent was approaching. He was seen in tramcars going to and fro between the town and the harbour. He talked with people in a cafe or two in his measured, steady voice. Captain Fidanza was in. The generation that would know nothing of the famous ride to Caita was not born yet. Nostromo, the miscalled capataz de cargadores, had made for himself, under his rightful name, another public existence, but modified by the new conditions, less picturesque, more difficult to keep up in the increased size of varied population of Sulaco, the progressive capital of the Occidental Republic. Captain Fidanza, unpicturesque but always a little mysterious, was recognized quite sufficiently under the lofty glass and iron roof of the Sulaco railway station. He took a local train and got out in Rincon, where he visited the widow of the cargador who had died of his wounds at the dawn of the new era, like Don Jose Avellanos, in the patio of the Casa Gould. He consented to sit down and drink a glass of cool lemonade in the hut, while the woman, standing up, poured a perfect torrent of words to which he did not listen. He left some money with her as usual. The orphan children, growing up and well schooled, calling him uncle, clamoured for his blessing. He gave that too, and in the doorway paused for a moment to look at the flat face of the San Tome mountain with a faint frown. This slight contraction of his bronze brow casting a marked tinge of severity upon his usual unbending expression, was observed at the lodge which he attended, but went away before the banquet. He wore it at the meeting of some good comrades, Italians and Occidentals, assembled in his honour under the presidency of an indigent, sickly, somehow hunchbacked little photographer, with a white face and a magnanimous soul dyed crimson by the bloodthirsty hate of all capitalists, oppressors of the two hemispheres. The heroic Giorgio Viola, old revolutionist, would have understood nothing of his opening speech, and Captain Fidanza, lavishly generous as usual to some poor comrades, made no speech at all. He had listened, frowning, with his mind far away, and walked off unapproachable, silent, like a man full of cares. His frown depended as, in the early morning, he watched the stone masons go off to the Great Isabel, in lighters loaded with squared blocks of stone, enough to add another course to the squat light tower. That was the rate of the work, 1 course per day. And Captain Fidanza meditated. The presence of strangers on the island could cut him completely off the treasure. It had been difficult and dangerous enough before. He was afraid, and he was angry. He thought with the resolution of a master and the cunning of a cowed slave. Then he went ashore. He was a man of resource and ingenuity, and as usual, the expedient he found at the critical moment was effective enough to alter the situation radically. He had the gift of evolving safety out of the very danger. This incomparable Nostromo, this fellow in a thousand. With Giorgio established on the Great Isabel, there would be no need for concealment. He would be able to go openly, in daylight, to see his daughters, one of his daughters, and stay late talking to the old Garibaldino. Then, in the dark, night after night, he would dare to grow rich quicker now. He yearned to clasp, embrace, absorb, subjugate, in unquestioned possession this treasure whose tyranny had weighed upon his mind, his actions, his very sleep. He went to see his friend Captain Mitchell, and the thing was done as Dr. Monygham had related to Mr. Gould. When the project was mooted to the Garibaldino, something like the faint reflection, the dim ghost of a very ancient smile, stole under the white and enormous moustaches of the old hater of kings and ministers. His daughters were the object of his anxious care. The younger, especially Linda, with her mother's voice, had taken more her mother's place. Her deep, vibrating padre seemed, but for the change of the word, the very echo of the impassioned, remonstrating Giorgio of poor Signora Teresa. It was his fixed opinion that the town was no proper place for his girls. The infatuated but guileless Ramirez was the object of his profound aversion, as resuming the sins of the country whose people were blind, vile esclavos. On his return from his next voyage, Captain Fidanza found the Violas settled in the light-keeper's cottage. His knowledge of Giorgio's idiosyncrasies had not played him false. The Garibaldino had refused to entertain the idea of any companion whatever except his girls, and Captain Mitchell, anxious to please his poor Nostromo with that felicity of inspiration which only true affection can give, had formally appointed Linda Viola as underkeeper of the Isabel Light. The light is private property, he used to explain. It belongs to my company. I've the power to nominate whom I like, and Viola it shall be. It's about the only thing, Nostromo, a man worth his weight in gold, mind you, has ever asked me to do for him. Directly his schooner was anchored opposite the new custom house, with its sham air of a Greek temple, flat-roofed, with a colonnade. Captain Fidanza went pulling his small boat out of the harbour, bound for the Great Isabel, openly in the light of a declining day, before all men's eyes, with a sense of having mastered the fates. He must establish a regular position. He would ask him for his daughter now. He thought of Giselle as he pulled. Linda loved him, perhaps, but the old man would be glad to keep the elder, who was his wife's spouse. He did not pull for the narrow strand where he had landed with the Could, and afterwards alone on his first visit to the treasure. He made for the beach at the other end, and walked up the regular and gentle slope of the wedge-shaped island. Giorgio Viola, whom he saw from afar, sitting on a bench under the front wall of the cottage, lifted his arm slightly to his loud hail. He walked up. Neither of the girls appeared. "It is good here," said the old man, in his austere, far-away manner. Nostromo nodded. Then, after a short silence, "You saw my schooner pass in not 2 hours ago? Do you know why I am here before, so to speak, my anchor has fairly bitten into the ground of this port of Sulaco?" "You are welcome like a son," the old man declared, quietly, staring away upon the sea. "Ah, thy son! I know. I am what thy son would have been. It is well, viejo. It is a very good welcome. Listen, I have come to ask you for—" A sudden dread came up upon the fearless and incorruptible Nostromo. He dared not utter the name in his mind. The slight pause only imparted a marked weight of solemnity to the changed end of the phrase. "For my wife!" His heart was beating fast. "It is time you—" The Garibaldino arrested him with an extended arm. "That was left for you to judge." He got up slowly. His beard, unclipped since Teresa's death, thick, snow-white, covered his powerful chest. He turned his head to the door and called out in his strong voice, "Linda!" Her answer came sharp and faint from within, and the appalled Nostromo stood up too, but remained mute, gazing at the door. He was afraid. He was not afraid of being refused the girl he loved. No mere refusal could stand between him and a woman he desired. But the shining spectre of the treasure rose before him, claiming his allegiance in a silence that could not be gainsaid. He was afraid because, neither dead nor alive, like the gringos on Azuera, he belonged body and soul to the unlawfulness of his audacity. He was afraid of being forbidden the island. He was afraid, and said nothing. Seeing the two men standing up side by side to await her, Linda stopped in the doorway. Nothing could alter the passionate dead whiteness of her face, but her black eyes seemed to catch and concentrate all the light of the low sun in a flaming spark within the black depths, covered at once by the slow descent of heavy eyelids. "Behold thy husband, master and benefactor!" Old Viola's voice resounded with a force that seemed to fill the whole gulf. She stepped forward with her eyes nearly closed, like a sleepwalker in a beatific dream. Nostromo made a superhuman effort. "It is time, Linda, we two were betrothed," he said, steadily, in his level, careless, unbending tone. She put her hand into his offered palm, lowering her head, dark with bronze glints, upon which her father's hand rested for a moment. "And so the soul of the dead is satisfied." This came from Giorgio Viola, who went on talking for a while of his dead wife, while the two, sitting side by side, never looked at each other. Then the old man ceased, and Linda, motionless, began to speak. "Ever since I felt I lived in the world, I have lived for you alone, Gian Battista. And that you knew it, Battistino." She pronounced his name exactly with her mother's intonation. A gloom as of the grave covered Nostromo's heart. "Yes, I knew," he said. The heroic Garibaldino sat on the same bench bowing his hoary head, his old soul dwelling along with his memories, tender and violent, terrible and dreary, solitary on the earth full of men. And Linda, his best loved daughter, was saying, "I was yours ever since I can remember. I had only to think of you for the earth to become empty to my eyes. When you were there, I could see no one else. I was yours. Nothing is changed. The world belongs to you, and you let me live in it. She dropped her bow, vibrating voice to a still lower note, and found other things to say, torturing for the man at her side. Her murmur ran on ardent and voluble. She did not seem to see her sister, who came out with an altar cloth she was embroidering in her hands, and passed in front of them, silent, fresh, fair, with a quick glance and a faint smile, to sit a little away on the other side of Nostromo. The evening was still. The sun sank almost to the edge of a purple ocean, and the white lighthouse, livid against the background of clouds, filling the head of the gulf, bore the lantern red and glowing like a live ember kindled by the fire of the sky. Giselle, indolent and demure, raised the altar glow from time to time to hide nervous yawns as of a young panther. Suddenly Linda rushed at her sister, and seizing her head, covered her face with kisses. Nostromo's brain reeled. When she left her, as if stunned by the violent caresses, with her head lying in her lap, the slave of the treasure felt as if he could shoot that woman. Old Giorgio lifted his leonine head. "Where are you going, Linda?" "To the light, Padre mio." Si, to your duty." He got up too, looked after his eldest daughter. Then, in a tone whose festive note seemed the echo of a mood lost in the night of ages, "I am going in to cook something. Aha, son, the old man knows where to find a bottle of wine, too." He turned to Giselle with a change of austere tenderness. "And you, little one, pray not to the God of priests and slaves, but to the God of orphans, of the oppressed, of the poor, of little children, to give thee a man like this one for a husband." His hand rested heavily for a moment on Nostromo's shoulder. Then he went in. The hopeless slave of the San Tome silver felt at these words the venomous fangs of jealousy biting deep into his heart. He was appalled by the novelty of the experience, by its force, by its physical intimacy. A husband for her! And yet it was natural that Giselle should have a husband at some time or other. He had never realized that before. In discovering that her beauty could belong to another, he felt as though he could kill this one of all Giorgio's daughters also. He muttered moodily, "They say you love Ramirez." She shook her head without looking at him. Coppery grins rippled to and fro on the wealth of her gold hair. Her smooth forehead had the soft, pure sheen of a priceless pearl in the splendor of the sunset, mingling the gloom of starry spaces, the purple of the sea, and the crimson on the sky in a magnificent stillness. "No," she said slowly, "I never loved him. I think I never... He loves me, perhaps." The seduction of her slow voice died out of the air, and her raised eyes remained fixed on nothing, as if indifferent and without thought. "Ramirez told you he loved you?" asked Nostromo, restraining himself. "Ah, once. One evening." The miserable, huh? He had jumped up, as if stung by a gadfly, and stood before her mute with anger. "Misericordia divina! You too, Gian Battista! Poor wretch that I am!" she lamented in ingenuous tones. "I told Linda, and she scolded. She scolded. Am I to live blind, dumb, and deaf in this world? And she told father, who took down his gun and cleaned it. Poor Ramirez! Then you came, and she told you." He looked at her. He fastened his eyes upon the hollow of her white throat, which had the invincible charm of things young, palpitating, delicate, and alive. Was this the child he had known? Was it possible? It dawned upon him that in these last years he had really seen very little, nothing, of her. Nothing. She had come into the world like a thing unknown. She had come upon him unawares. She was a danger, a frightful danger. The instinctive mood of fierce determination that had never felt him before the perils of this life added its steady force to the violence of his passion. She, in a voice that recalled to him the song of running water, the tinkling of a silver bell, continued, "And between you three you have brought me here into this captivity to the sky and water. Nothing else, sky and water. O Sanctissima Madre, my hair shall turn grey on this tedious island. I could hate you, Gian Battista." He laughed loudly. Her voice enveloped him like a caress. She bemoaned her fate, spreading unconsciously, like a flower its perfume in the coolness of the evening, the indefinable seduction of her person. Was it her fault that nobody ever admired Linda? Even when they were little, going out with their mother to mass, she remembered that people took no notice of Linda, who was fearless, and chose instead to frighten her, who was timid, with their attention. It was her hair like gold, she supposed. He broke out. Your hair like gold, and your eyes like violets, and your lips like the rose, your round arms, your white throat. Imperturbable in the indolence of her pose, she blushed deeply all over to the roots of her hair. She was not conceited. She was no more self-conscious than a flower, but she was pleased, and perhaps even a flower loves to hear itself praised. He glanced down and added impetuously, "Your little feet." Leaning back against the rough stone wall of the cottage, she seemed to bask languidly in the warmth of the rosy flush. Only her lowered eyes glanced at her little feet. "And so you're going at last to marry our Linda. She's terrible. Ah, now she will understand better since you have told her you love her. She will not be so fierce." "Chica," said Nostromo, "I have not told her anything." "Then make haste. Come tomorrow. Come and tell her, so that I may have some peace from her scolding, and perhaps, who knows, be allowed to listen to the Ramirez, eh? Is that it? You... Mercy of God! How violent you are, Giovanni!" she said, unmoved. "Who is Ramirez? Ramirez? Who is he?" she repeated, dreamily, in the dusk and gloom of her clouded gulf, with a low red streak in the west like a hot bar of glowing iron laid across the entrance of a world sombre as a cavern, where the magnificent capataz de cargadores had hidden his conquests of love and wealth. "Listen, Giselle," he said in measured tones. "I will tell no word of love to your sister. Do you want to know why? Alas! I could not understand, perhaps, Giovanni. Father says you are not like other men, that no one had ever understood you properly, that the rich will be surprised yet. Oh, saints in heaven, I am weary." She raised her embroidery to conceal the lower part of her face, then let it fall on her lap. The lantern was shaded on the land side, but slanting away from the dark column of the lighthouse, they could see the long shaft of light, kindled by Linda, go out to strike the expiring glow in a horizon of purple and red. Giselle Viola, with her head resting against the wall of the house, her eyes half closed, and her little feet, in white stockings and black slippers, crossed over each other, seemed to surrender herself, tranquil and fatal, to the gathering dusk. The charm of her body, the promising mysteriousness of her indolence, went out into the night of the placid gulf like a fresh and intoxicating fragrance spreading out in the shadows, impregnating the air. The incorruptible Nostromo breathed her ambient seduction in the tumultuous heaven of his breast. Before leaving the harbour he had thrown off the store clothing of Captain Fidanza, for greater ease in the long pull out of the islands. He stood before her in the red sash and check shirt as he used to appear on the company's wharf, a Mediterranean sailor come ashore to try his luck in Costaguana. The dusk of purple and red enveloped him, too, closed, soft, profound, as no more than 50 yards from the spot it had gathered evening after evening about the self-destructive passion of Don Martin Decoud's utter scepticism flaming up to death in solitude. "You have got to hear," he began at last with perfect self-control. "I shall say no word of love to your sister, to whom I am betrothed from this evening, because it is you that I love. It is you." The dusk let him see yet the tender and voluptuous smile that came instinctively upon her lips, shaped for love and kisses, freeze hard in the drawn, haggard lines of terror. He could not restrain himself any longer. While she shrank from his approach, her arms went out to him, abandoned and regaled in the dignity of her languid surrender. He held her head in his two hands, and showered rapid kisses upon the upturned face that gleamed in the purple dusk. Masterful and tender, he was entering slowly upon the fullness of his possession, and he perceived that she was crying. Then the incomparable capataz, the man of careless loves, became gentle and caressing, like a woman to the grief of a child. He murmured to her fondly. He sat down by her and nursed her fair head on his breast. He called her his star and his little flower. It had grown dark. From the living room of the light keeper's cottage, where Giorgio, one of the immortal thousand, was bending his leonine and heroic head over a charcoal fire, there came the sound of sizzling and the aroma of an artistic frittura. In the obscure disarray of that thing, happening like a cataclysm, It was in her feminine head that some gleam of reason survived. He was lost to the world in their embrace and stillness. But she said, whispering into his ear, God of mercy, what will become of me, here, now, between this sky and this water I hate? Linda, Linda, I see her. She tried to get out of his arms, suddenly relaxed at the sound of that name, but there was no one approaching the black shapes, enlaced and struggling on the white background of the wall. Linda, poor Linda, I tremble. I shall die of fear before my poor sister Linda, betrothed today to Giovanni, my lover. Giovanni, you must have been mad. I cannot understand you. You are not like other men. I will not give you up, never, only to God himself. But why have you done this blind, mad, cruel, frightful thing? Released, she hung her head, let fall her hands. The altar cloth, as if tossed by a great wind, lay far away from him, gleaming of white on the black ground. From fear of losing my hope of you, said Nostromo. You knew that you had my soul. You know everything. It was made for you. But what could stand between you and me? What? Tell me, she repeated without impatience, in superb assurance. Your dead mother, he said, very low. Ah, poor mother. She is a saint in heaven now, and I cannot give you up to her. No, Giovanni, only to God alone. You were mad, but it is done. Oh, what have you done? Giovanni, my beloved, my life, my master, do not leave me here in this grave of clouds. You cannot leave me now. You must take me away, at once, this instant, in a little boat. Giovanni, carry me off tonight, from my fear of Linda's eyes, before I have to look at her again. She nestled close to him. The slave of the San Tome silver felt the weight as of chains upon his limbs, a pressure as of a cold hand upon his lips. He struggled against the spell. I cannot, he said. Not yet. There is something that stands between us two and the freedom of the world. She pressed her form closer to his side with a subtle and naive instinct of seduction. You rave, Giovanni, my lover, she whispered engagingly. What can there be? Carry me off, in thy very hands, to Dona Emilia, away from here. I am not very heavy. It seemed as though she expected him to lift her up at once in his two palms. She had lost the notion of all impossibility. Anything could happen in this night of wonder. As he made no movement, she almost cried out. I tell you I am afraid of Linda. And still he did not move. She became quiet and willing. What can there be? She asked coaxingly. He felt her warm breathing alive, quivering in the hollow of his arm. In the exulting consciousness of his strength and the triumphant excitement of his mind, he struck out for his freedom. A treasure, he said. All was still. She did not understand. A treasure of silver to buy a gold crown for thy brow. A treasure? She repeated in a faint voice, as if from the depths of a dream. What is it you say? She disengaged herself gently. He got up and looked down at her, aware of her face, of her hair, her lips, the dimples of her cheeks. Seeing the fascination of her person in the night of the gulf as if in the blaze of noonday. Her nonchalant and seductive voice trembled with the excitement of admiring awe and ungovernable curiosity. A treasure of silver, she stammered out, then pressed on faster. What? Where? How did you get it, Giovanni? He wrestled with the spell of captivity. It was as if striking a heroic blow that he burst out, like a thief. The densest blackness of the placid gulf seemed to fall upon his head. He could not see her now. She had vanished into a long, obscure, abysmal silence, whence her voice came back to him after a time with a faint glimmer, which was her face. I love you. I love you. These words gave him an unwonted sense of freedom. They cast a spell stronger than the accursed spell of the treasure. They changed his weary subjection to that dead thing into an exulting conviction of his power. He would cherish her, he said, in a splendour as great as Dona Emilia's. The rich lived on wealth stolen from the people, but he had taken from the rich nothing that was not lost to them already by their folly and their betrayal. For he had been betrayed, he said, deceived, tempted. She believed him. He had kept the treasure for purposes of revenge, but now he cared nothing for it. He cared only for her. He would put her beauty in a palace on a hill crowned with olive trees, a white palace above a blue sea. He would keep her there like a jewel in a casket. He would get land for her own land fertile with vines and corn, to set her little feet upon. He kissed them. He had already paid for it all with the soul of a woman and the life of a man. The capataz of cargadores tasted the supreme intoxication of his generosity. He flung the master treasure superbly at her feet in the impenetrable darkness of the gulf, in the darkness defying, as men said, the knowledge of God and the wit of the devil. But she must let him grow rich fast, he warned her. She listened as if in a trance. Her fingers stirred in his hair. He got up from his knees reeling, weak, empty, as though he had flung his soul away. "Make haste, then," she said. "Make haste, Giovanni, my lover, my master, for I will give thee up to no one but God, and I am afraid of Linda." He gasped at her shudder and swore to do his best. He trusted the courage of her love. She promised to be brave in order to love always, far away in a white palace upon a hill above a blue sea. Then, with a timid, tentative eagerness, she murmured, "Where is it? Where? Tell me that, Giovanni." He opened his mouth and remained silent, thunderstruck. "Not that! Not that!" he gasped out, appalled at the spell of secrecy that had kept him dumb before so many people falling upon his lips again with unimpaired force. "Not even to her. Not even to her. It was too dangerous. I forbid thee to ask," he cried at her, deadening cautiously the anger of his voice. He had not regained his freedom. The inspector of the unlawful treasure arose, standing by her side like a figure of silver, pitiless and secret, with a finger on its pale lips. His soul died within him at the vision of himself creeping imprisonedly along the ravine, with the smell of earth, of damp foliage in his nostrils, creeping in, determined in a purpose that numbed his breast, and creeping out again, loaded with silver, with his ears alert to every sound. It must be done on this very night, that work of a craven slave. He stooped low, pressed the hem of her skirt to his lips with a muttered command. "Tell him I would not stay," and was gone suddenly from her, silent, without as much as a footfall in the dark night. She sat still, her head resting indolently against the wall, and her little feet in white stockings and black slippers crossed over each other. Old Giorgio, coming out, did not seem to be surprised at the intelligence as much as she had vaguely feared, for she was full of inexplicable fear now, fear of everything and everybody except of her Giovanni and his treasure. But that was incredible. The heroic Garibaldino accepted Nostromo's abrupt departure with a sagacious indulgence. He remembered his own feelings, and exhibited a masculine penetration of the true state of the case. "Va bene, let him go. Ha! No matter how fair the woman, it galls a little. Liberty, liberty! There's more than one kind. He has said the great word, and son Gian Battista is not tame." He seemed to be instructing the motionless and scared Giselle. "A man should not be tame," he added dogmatically out of the doorway. Her stillness and silence seemed to displease him. "Do not give way to the enviousness of your sister's lot," he admonished her, very grave, in his deep voice. Presently he had come to the door again to call in his younger daughter. It was late. He shouted her name 3 times before she even moved her head. Left alone, she had become the helpless prey of astonishment. She walked into the bathroom she shared with Linda like a person profoundly asleep. That aspect was so marked that even old Giorgio, spectacled, raising his eyes from the Bible, shook his head as she shut the door behind her. She walked right across the room without looking at anything, and sat down at once by the open window. Linda, stealing down from the tower in the exuberance of her happiness, found her with a lighted candle at her back, facing the black night full of sighing gusts of wind and the sound of distant showers, a true night of the Gulf, too dense for the eye of God and the wiles of the devil. She did not turn her head at the opening of the door. There was something in that immobility which reached Linda in the depths of her paradise. The elder sister guessed angrily. "The child is thinking of that wretched Ramirez." Linda longed to talk. She said in her arbitrary voice, "Giselle," and was not answered by the slightest movement. The girl that was going to live in a palace and walked on ground of her own was ready to die with terror. Not for anything in the world would she have turned her head to face her sister. Her heart was beating madly. She said with subdued haste, "Do not speak to me. I am praying." Linda, disappointed, went out quietly, and Giselle sat on unbelieving, lost, dazed, patient, as if waiting for the confirmation of the incredible. The hopeless blackness of the clouds seemed part of a dream, too. She waited. She did not wait in vain. The man whose soul was dead within him, creeping out of the ravine, weighted with silver, had seen the gleam of the lighted window, and could not help retracing his steps from the beach. On that impenetrable background, obliterating the lofty mountains up by the seaboard, she saw the slave of the San Tome silver, as if by an extraordinary power of a miracle. She accepted his return as if henceforth the world could hold no surprise for all eternity. She rose, compelled and rigid, and began to speak long before the light from within fell upon the face of the approaching man. "You have come back to carry me off. It is well. Open thy arms, Giovanni, my lover. I am coming." His prudent footsteps stopped, and with his eyes glistening wildly, he spoke in a harsh voice. "Not yet. I must grow rich slowly." A threatening note came into his tone. "Do not forget that you have a thief for your lover." "Yes, yes," she whispered hastily. "Come nearer. Listen. Do not give me up, Giovanni. Never, never. I will be patient." Her form drooped consolingly over the low casement towards the slave of the unlawful treasure. The light in the room went out, and weighted with silver. The magnificent capataz clasped her round her white neck in the darkness of the gulf as a drowning man clutches at a straw. End of Part 3, Chapter 12. Chapter 13, Part 3 of Nostromo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mario Pineda. Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. Part 3. The Lighthouse. Chapter 13. On the day Mrs. Gould was going, in Dr. Monygham's words, to give a tertulia, Captain Fidanza went down the side of his schooner lying in Sulaco harbour, calm, unbending, deliberate in the way he sat down in his dinghy and took up his sculls. He was later than usual. The afternoon was well advanced before he landed on the beach of the Great Isabel, and with a steady pace climbed the slope of the island. From a distance he made out Giselle sitting in a chair tilted back against the end of the house, under the window of the girl's room. She had her embroidery in her hands, and held it well up to her eyes. The tranquillity of that girlish figure exasperated the feeling of perpetual struggle and strife he carried in his breast. He became angry. It seemed to him that she ought to hear the clanking on his fetters, his silver fetters, from afar, and while ashore that day, he had met the doctor with the evil eye, who had looked at him very hard. The raising of her eyes mollified him. They smiled in their flower-like freshness straight upon his heart. Then she frowned. It was a warning to be cautious. He stopped some distance away, and in a loud, indifferent tone said, "Good day, Giselle. Is Linda up yet?" "Yes, she is in the big room with father." He approached then, and looking through the window into the bedroom, for fear of being detected by Linda returning there for some reason, he said, moving only his lips, "You love me?" "More than my life," she went on with her embroidery under his contemplating gaze, and continued to speak, looking at her work. "Or I could not live. I could not, Giovanni, for this life is like death. Oh, Giovanni, I shall perish if you do not take me away." He smiled carelessly. "I will come to the window when it's dark," he said. "No, don't, Giovanni. Not tonight. Linda and father have been talking together for a long time today." "What about?" "Ramirez, I fancy. I heard. I do not know. I am afraid. I am always afraid. It's like dying 1,000 times a day. Your love is to me like your treasure to you. It is there, but I can never get enough of it." He looked at her very still. She was beautiful. His desire had grown within him. He had two masters now. But she was incapable of sustained emotion. She was sincere in what she said, but she slept placidly at night. When she saw him, she flamed up always. Then only an increased taciturnity marked the change in her. She was afraid of betraying herself. She was afraid of pain, of bodily harm, of sharp words, of facing anger and witnessing violence. For her soul was light and tender with a pagan sincerity in its impulses. She murmured, "Give up the palazzo, Giovanni, and the vineyard on the hills, for which we are starving our love." She ceased, seeing Linda standing silent at the corner of the house. Nostromo turned to his affianced wife with a greeting, and was amazed at her sunken eyes, at her hollow cheeks, at the air of illness and anguish in her face. "Have you been ill?" he asked, trying to put some concern into his question. Her black eyes blazed at him. "Am I thinner?" she asked. "Yes, perhaps. A little." "And older?" "Every day counts. For all of us." "I shall go grey, I fear, before the ring is on my finger," she said, slowly, keeping her gaze fastened upon him. She waited for what he would say, rolling down her turned-up sleeves. "No fear of that," he said absently. She turned away as if it had been something final, and busied herself with household cares while Nostromo talked with her father. Conversation with the old Garibaldino was not easy. Age had left his faculties unimpaired, only they seemed to have withdrawn somewhere deep within him. His answers were slow in coming, with an effect of august gravity. But that day he was more animated, quicker. There seemed to be more life in the old lion. He was uneasy for the integrity of his honour. He believed Sidoni's warning as to Ramirez's designs upon his younger daughter, and he did not trust her. She was flighty. He said nothing of his cares to son Gian Battista. It was a touch of senile vanity. He wanted to show that he was equal yet to the task of guarding alone the honour of his house. Nostromo went away early. As soon as he had disappeared, walking towards the beach, Linda stepped over the threshold and, with a haggard smile, sat down by the side of her father. Ever since that Sunday, when the infatuated and desperate Ramirez had waited for her on the wharf, she had no doubts whatever. The jealous ravings of that man were no revelation. They had only fixed with precision, as with a nail driven into her heart, that sense of unreality and deception which, instead of bliss and security, she had found in her intercourse with her promised husband. She had passed on, pouring indignation and scorn upon Ramirez. But that Sunday she nearly died of wretchedness and shame, lying on the carved and lettered stone of Teresa's grave, subscribed for by the engine drivers and the fitters of the railway workshops, in sign of their respect for the hero of Italian unity. Old Viola had not been able to carry out his desire of burying his wife in the sea, and Linda wept upon the stone. The gratuitous outrage appalled her. If he wished to break her heart, well and good. Everything was permitted to Gian Battista. But why trample upon the pieces? Why seek to humiliate her spirit? Aha! He could not break that. She dried her tears. And Giselle! Giselle! The little one that, ever since she could toddle, had always clung to her skirt for protection. What duplicity! But she could not help it probably. When there was a man in the case, the poor feather-headed wretch could not help herself. Linda had a good share of the Viola stoicism. She resolved to say nothing. But, womanlike, she put passion into her stoicism. Giselle's short answers, prompted by fearful caution, drove her beside herself by their curtness that resembled disdain. One day she flung herself from the chair in which her indolent sister was lying and impressed the mark of her teeth at the base of the whitest neck in Sulaco. Giselle cried out, but she had her share of the Viola heroism. Ready to faint with terror, she only said in a lazy voice, "Madre de Dios, are you going to eat me alive, Linda?" And this outburst passed off, leaving no trace upon the situation. She knows nothing. She cannot know anything, reflected Giselle. Perhaps it is not true. It cannot be true. Linda tried to persuade herself. But when she saw Captain Fidanza for the first time after her meeting with the distracted Ramirez, the certitude of her misfortune returned. She watched him from the doorway go away to his boat, asking herself stoically, "Will they meet tonight?" She made up her mind not to leave the tower for a second. When he had disappeared, she came out and sat down by her father. The venerable Garibaldino felt, on his own words, a young man yet. In one way or another, a good deal of talk about Ramirez had reached him of late, and his contempt and dislike of that man, who obviously was not what his son would have been, had made him restless. He slept very little now, but for several nights passed instead of reading, or only sitting, with Mrs. Gould's silver spectacles on his nose, before the open Bible. He had been prowling actively all about the island with his old gun, on watch over his honor. Linda, laying her thin brown hand on his knee, tried to soothe his excitement. Ramirez was not in Sulaco. Nobody knew where he was. He was gone. His talk of what he would do meant nothing. No, the old man interrupted. But son Gian Battista told me, quite of himself, that the cowardly esclavo was drinking and gambling with the rascals of Sapiga, over there on the north side of the Gulf. He might get some of the worst scoundrels of that scoundrelly town of negroes to help him in his attempt on the little one. But I am not so old. No. She argued earnestly against the probability of any attempt being made, and at last the old man fell silent, chewing his white moustache. Women had their obstinate notions which must be humoured. His poor wife was like that, and Linda resembled her mother. It was not seemly for a man to argue. Maybe, he mumbled. She was by no means easy in her mind. She loved Nostromo. She turned her eyes upon Giselle, sitting at a distance, with something of maternal tenderness, and the jealous anguish of a rival outraged in her defeat. Then she rose and walked over to her. "Listen, you," she said roughly. The invincible candour of the gaze, raised up, all violet and dew, excited her rage and admiration. She had beautiful eyes, the chica, this vile thing of white flesh and black deception. She did not know whether she wanted to tear them out with shouts of vengeance or cover up their mysterious and shameless innocence with kisses of pity and love. And suddenly they became empty, gazing blankly at her, except for a little fear not quite buried deep enough with all the other emotions in Giselle's heart. Linda said, "Ramirez is boasting in town that he will carry you off from the island." "What folly!" answered the other, and in a perversity born of long restraint she added, "He is not the man," in a jesting tone with a trembling audacity. "No?" said Linda, through her clenched teeth. "Is he not? Well then, look to it, because father has been walking about with a loaded gun at night. It is not good for him. You must tell him not to, Linda. He will not listen to me." "I shall sell nothing, never any more, to anybody," cried Linda passionately. This could not last, thought Giselle. Giovanni must take her away soon, the very next time he came. She would not suffer these terrors for ever so much silver. To speak with her sister made her ill, but she was not uneasy at her father's watchfulness. She had begged Nostromo not to come to the window that night. He had promised to keep away for this once. And she did not know, could not guess or imagine that he had another reason for coming to the island. Linda had gone straight to the tower. It was time to light up. She unlocked the little door and went heavily up the spiral staircase, carrying her love for the magnificent capataz de cargadores like an ever-increasing load of shameful fetters. No, she could not throw it off. No, let heaven dispose of this too. And moving about the lantern, filled with twilight and the sheen of the moon, with careful movements she lighted the lamp. Then her arms fell along her body. And with our mother looking on, she murmured, "My own sister, the chica." The whole refracting apparatus, with its brass fittings and rings of prisms, glittered and sparkled like a dome-shaped shrine of diamonds, containing not a lamp but some sacred flame, dominating the sea. And Linda, the keeper, in black, with a pale face, drooped low in a wooden chair, alone with her jealousy, far above the shames and passions of the earth. A strange, dragging pain, as if somebody were pulling her about brutally by her dark hair with bronze glints, made her put her hands up to her temples. They would meet. They would meet. And she knew where, too. At the window. The sweat of torture fell in drops in her cheeks, while the moonlight in the offing closed as if with a colossal bar of silver the entrance of the placid gulf, the sombre cavern of clouds and stillness in the surf-fretted seaboard. Linda Viola stood up suddenly with a finger on her lip. He loved neither her nor her sister. The whole thing seemed so objectless as to frighten her, and also give her some hope. Why did he not carry her off? What prevented him? He was incomprehensible. What were they waiting for? For what end were these two lying and deceiving? Not for the ends of their love. There was no such thing. The hope of regaining him for herself made her break her vow of not leaving the tower that night. She must talk at once to her father, who was wise and would understand. She ran down the spiral stairs. At the moment of opening the door at the bottom, she heard the sound of the first shot ever fired on the Great Isabel. She felt a shock, as though the bullet had struck her breast. She ran on without pausing. The cottage was dark. She cried at the door, "Giselle! Giselle!" Then dashed round the corner and screamed her sister's name at the open window without getting an answer. But as she was rushing, distracted, round the house, Giselle came out the door and darted past her, running silently, her hair loose and her eyes staring straight ahead. She seemed to skim along the grass as if on tiptoe, and vanished. Linda walked on slowly, with her arms stretched out before her. All was still on the island. She did not know where she was going. The tree under which Martin Decoud spent his last days, beholding life like a succession of senseless images, threw a large blotch of black shade upon the grass. Suddenly, she saw her father standing quietly all alone in the moonlight. The Garibaldino, big, erect, with his snow-white hair and beard, had a monumental repose in his immobility, leaning upon a rifle. She put her hand upon his arm lightly. He never stirred. "What have you done?" she asked in her ordinary voice. "I have shot Ramirez, infame," he answered, with his eyes directed to where the shade was blackest. Like a thief he came, and like a thief he fell. The child had to be protected. He did not offer to move an inch, to advance a single step. He stood there, rugged and unstirring, like a statue of an old man guarding the honour of his house. Linda removed her trembling hand from his arm, firm and steady, like an arm of stone, and, without a word, entered the blackness of the shade. She saw a stir of formless shapes on the ground, and stopped short. A murmur of despair and tears grew louder to her strained hearing. "I entreated you not to come tonight. Oh, my Giovanni! And you promised. Oh, why? Why did you come, Giovanni?" It was her sister's voice. It broke on a heart-rending sob, and the voice of the resourceful capataz de cargadores, master and slave of the San Tome treasure, who had been caught unawares by old Giorgio, while stealing across the open towards the ravine to get some more silver, answered careless and cool, but sounding startlingly weak from the ground. "It seemed as though I could not live through the night without seeing thee once more, my star, my little flower." The brilliant tertulia was just over, the last guests had departed, and the Senor Administrador had gone to his room already when Dr. Monygham, who had been expected in the evening but had not turned up, arrived driving along the wood-block pavement under the electric lamps of the deserted Calle de la Constitucion, and found the great gateway of the casa still open. He limped in, stumped at the stairs, and found the fat and sleek Basilio on the point of turning off the lights in the sala. The prosperous majordomo remained open-mouthed at this late invasion. "Don't put out the lights," commanded the doctor. "I want to see the senora." "The senora is in the Senor Administrador's cancillaria," said Basilio in an unctuous voice. "The Senor Administrador starts for the mountain in an hour. There is some trouble with the workmen to be feared, it appears. A shameless people without reason and decency. And idle, senor. Idle." "You are shamelessly lazy and imbecile yourself," said the doctor, with that faculty for exasperation which made him so generally beloved. "Don't put lights out." Basilio retired with dignity. Dr. Monygham, waiting in the brilliantly lighted sala, heard presently a door close at the further end of the house. A jingle of spurs died out. The Senor Administrador was off to the mountain. With a measured swish of her long train, flashing with jewels and the shimmer of silk, her delicate head bowed as if under the weight of a mass of fair hair in which the silvered threads were lost, the First Lady of Sulaco, as Captain Mitchell used to describe her, moved along the lighted corridor wealthy beyond great dreams of wealth, considered loved, respected, honored, and as solitary as any human being had ever been, perhaps, on this earth. The doctors, Mrs. Gould, 1 minute, stopped her with a start at the door of the lighted and empty sala. From the similarity of mood and circumstance, the sight of the doctor, standing there all along amongst the groups of furniture, recalled to her emotional memory her unexpected meeting with Martin Decoud. She seemed to hear in the silence the voice of that man, dead miserably so many years ago, pronounce the words, "Antonia left her fan here." But it was the doctor's voice that spoke, a little altered by his excitement. She remarked his shining eyes. "Mrs. Gould, you are wanted. Do you know what has happened? You remember what I told you yesterday about Nostromo? Well, it seems that a lancha, a decked boat, coming from Sapiga, with 4 negroes in her, passing close to the Great Isabel, was hailed from the cliffs by a woman's voice, Linda's, as a matter of fact, commanding them, it is a moonlight night, to go round to the beach and take up a wounded man to the town. The patron, from whom I've heard all this, of course, did so at once. He told me that when they got round to the low side of the Great Isabel, they found Linda Viola waiting for them. They followed her. She led them under a tree not far from the cottage. There they found Nostromo lying on the ground, with his head in the younger girl's lap, and Father Viola standing some distance off, leaning on his gun. Under Linda's direction, they got a table out of the cottage for a stretcher, after breaking off the legs. They are here, Mrs. Gould, I mean Nostromo, and Giselle. The negroes brought him in to the first state hospital near the harbor. He made the attendant send for me. But it was not me he wanted to see. It was you, Mrs. Gould. It was you." "Me?" whispered Mrs. Gould, shrinking a little. "Yes, you," the doctor burst out. "He begged me, his enemy, as he thinks, to bring you to him at once. It seems he has something to say to you alone." "Impossible!" murmured Mrs. Gould. "He said to me, 'Remind her that I have done something to keep a roof over her head.'" Mrs. Gould. The doctor pursued, in the greatest excitement. "Do you remember the silver? The silver in the lighter that was lost?" Mrs. Gould remembered, but she did not say she hated the mere mention of that silver. Frankness personified, she remembered with an exaggerated horror that for the first and last time of her life she had concealed the truth from her husband about that very silver. She had been corrupted by her fears at that time, and she had never forgiven herself. Moreover, that silver, which would never have come down if her husband had been made acquainted with the news brought by Decoud, had been in a roundabout way nearly the cause of Dr. Monygham's death. And these things appeared to her very dreadful. "Was it lost, though?" the doctor exclaimed. "I've always felt that there was a mystery about our Nostromo ever since. I do believe he wants now at the point of death." "The point of death?" repeated Mrs. Gould. "Yes, yes. He wants perhaps to tell you something concerning that silver which—" "Oh, no, no!" exclaimed Mrs. Gould in a low voice. "Isn't it lost and done with? Isn't there enough treasure without it to make everybody in the world miserable?" The doctor remained still, in a submissive, disappointed silence. At last he ventured very low. "And there is that Viola girl, Giselle. What are we to do? It looks as though father and sister had—" Mrs. Gould admitted that she felt in duty bound to do her best for these girls. "I have a volante here," the doctor said, "if you don't mind getting into that." He waited, all impatience, till Mrs. Gould reappeared, having thrown over her dress a grey cloak with a deep hood. It was thus that, cloaked and monastically hooded over her evening costume, this woman, full of endurance and compassion, stood by her side of the bed on which the splendid capataz de cargadores lay stretched out motionless on his back. The whiteness of sheets and pillows gave a sombre and energetic relief to his bronzed face, to the dark, nervous hands, so good on a tiller, upon a bridle on the trigger, lying open and idle upon a white coverlet. "She is innocent," the capataz was saying in a deep and level voice, as though afraid that a louder word would break the slender hold his spirit still kept upon his body. "She is innocent. It is I alone. But no matter, for these things I would answer to no man or woman alive." He paused. Mrs. Gould's face, very white within the shadow of her hood, bent over him with an invincible and dreary sadness. And the low sobs of Giselle Viola, kneeling at the end of the bed, Her gold hair with coppery gleams loose and scattered over the capataz's feet hardly troubled the silence of the room. "Ha! Old Giorgio, the guardian of fine honour! Fancy the vecchio coming upon me so light of foot, so steady of aim. I myself could have done no better. But the price of a charge of powder might have been saved. The honour was safe, Senora. She would have followed to the end of the world Nostromo the thief. I have said the word. The spell is broken." A low moan from the girl made him cast his eyes down. "I cannot see her. No matter," he went on, with the shadow of the all magnificent carelessness in his voice. "One kiss is enough, if there is no time for more. An airy soul, Senora, bright and warm, like sunshine, soon clouded and soon serene. They would crush it there between them, Senora. Cast on her the eye of your compassion, as famed from one end of the land to the other as the courage and daring of the man who speaks to you. She will console herself in time. And even Ramirez is not a bad fellow. I am not angry. No, it is not Ramirez who overcame the capataz of the Sulaco cargadores." He paused, made an effort, and in a louder voice, a little wildly, declared, "I die betrayed. Betrayed by—" But he did not say by whom or by what he was dying betrayed. "She would not have betrayed me," he began again, opening his eyes very wide. "She was faithful. We were going very far. Very soon. I could have torn myself away from that accursed treasure for her. For that child I would have left boxes and boxes of it, full. And the coup took 4 ingots. Why? Picardia, to betray me. How could I give back the treasure with 4 ingots missing? They would have said I had purloined them. The doctor would have said that. Alas, it holds me yet." Mrs. Gould bent low, fascinated, cold with apprehension. "What became of Don Martino that night, Nostromo?" "Who knows? I wonder what would become of me. Now I know. Death was to come upon me unawares. He went away. He betrayed me. And you think I have killed him? You are all alike, you fine people. The silver has killed me. It has held me. It holds me yet. Nobody knows where it is. But you are the wife of Don Carlos, who put it into my hands and said, 'Save it on your life.' And when I returned, and you all thought it was lost, what do I hear? It was nothing of importance. Let it go. Up, Nostromo the faithful, and ride away to save us, for dear life." "Nostromo," Mrs. Gould whispered, bending very low, "I too have hated the idea of that silver from the bottom of my heart. Marvellous that one of you should hate the wealth that you know so well how to take from the hands of the poor. The world rests upon the poor, as old Giorgio says. You have been always good to the poor, but there is something accursed in wealth, Senora. Shall I tell you where the treasure is? To you alone? Shining, incorruptible." A pained involuntary reluctance lingered in his tone, in his eyes, plain to the woman with the genius of sympathetic intuition. She averted her glance from the miserable subjection of the dying man, appalled, wishing to hear no more of the silver. "No, capataz," she said. "No one misses it now. Let it be lost forever." After hearing these words, Nostromo closed his eyes, uttered no word, made no movement. Outside the door of the sick room, Dr. Monygham, excited to the highest pitch, his eyes shining with eagerness, came up to the two women. "Now, Mrs. Gould," he said, almost brutally in his impatience, "tell me, was I right? There is a mystery. You have got the word of it, have you not? He told you—" "He told me nothing," said Mrs. Gould steadily. The light of his temperamental enmity to Nostromo went out of Dr. Monygham's eyes. He stepped back submissively. He did not believe Mrs. Gould, but her word was law. He accepted her denial like an inexplicable fatality, affirming the victory of Nostromo's genius over his own. Even before that woman, whom he loved with secret devotion, he had been defeated by the magnificent capataz de cargadores, the man who had lived his own life on the assumption of unbroken fidelity, rectitude, and courage. "Pray send at once somebody for my carriage," spoke Mrs. Gould from within her hood. Then, turning to Giselle Viola, "Come nearer me, child. Come closer. We will wait here." Giselle Viola, heartbroken and childlike, her face veiled in her falling hair, crept up to her side. Mrs. Gould slipped her hand through the arm of the unworthy daughter of old Viola, the immaculate republican, the hero without a stain. Slowly, gradually, as a withered flower droops, the head of the girl who would have followed the thief to the end of the world rested on the shoulder of Doña Emilia, the first lady of Sulaco, the wife of the Señor Administrador of the San Tome mine. And Mrs. Gould, feeling her suppressed sobbing, nervous and excited, had the first and only moment of bitterness in her life. It was worthy of Dr. Monygham himself. Console yourself, child. Very soon he would have forgotten you for his treasure. Senora, he loved me, Giselle whispered despairingly. He loved me as no one had ever been loved before. I have been loved too, Mrs. Gould said in a severe tone. Giselle clung to her convulsively. Oh, Senora, but you shall live adored to the end of your life, she sobbed out. Mrs. Gould kept an unbroken silence till the carriage arrived. She helped in the half-fainting girl. After the doctor had shut the door of the landau, she leaned over to him. You can do nothing? She whispered. No, Mrs. Gould. Moreover, he won't let us touch him. It does not matter. I just had one look. Useless. But he promised to see old Viola and the other girl that very night. He could get the police boat to take him off to the island. He remained in the street, looking after the landau, rolling away slowly behind the white mules. The rumour of some accident, an accident to Captain Fidanza, had been spreading along the new quays with their rows of lamps and the dark shapes of towering cranes. A knot of night prowlers, the poorest of the poor, hung about the door of the first aid hospital, whispering in the moonlight of the empty street. There was no one with the wounded man but the pale photographer, small, frail, bloodthirsty, the hater of capitalists, perched on a high stool near the head of the bed with his knees up and his chin in his hands. He had been fetched by a comrade who, working late on the wharf, had heard from a negro belonging to a lancha that Captain Fidanza had been brought ashore mortally wounded. Have you any dispositions to make, comrade? He asked anxiously. Do not forget that we want money for our work. The rich must be fought with their own weapons. Nostromo made no answer. The other did not insist, remaining huddled up on the stool, shock-headed, wildly hairy, like a hunchbacked monkey. Then, after a long silence, Comrade Fidanza, he began solemnly, you have refused all aid from that doctor. Is he really a dangerous enemy of the people? In the dimly lit room, Nostromo rolled his head slowly on the pillow and opened his eyes, directing at the weird figure perched by his bedside a glance of enigmatic and profound inquiry. Then his head rolled back, his eyelids fell, and the capataz de cargadores died without a word or moan after an hour of immobility, broken by short shudders testifying to the most atrocious sufferings. Dr. Monygham, going out in the police galley to the islands, beheld the glitter of the moon upon the gulf and the high black shape of the great Isabel sending a shaft of light afar from under the canopy of clouds. Pull easy, he said, wondering what he would find there. He tried to imagine Linda and her father, and discovered a strange reluctance within himself. Pull easy, he repeated. From the moment he fired at the thief of his honour, Giorgio Viola had not stirred from the spot. He stood, his old gun grounded, his hand grasping the barrel near the muzzle. After the lancha carrying off Nostromo forever from her hand left the shore, Linda, coming up, stopped before them. He did not seem to be aware of her presence, but when losing her forced calmness, she cried out. Do you know whom you have killed? He answered. Ribierist, the vagabond. White and staring insanely at her father, Linda laughed in his face. After a time he joined her faintly in a deep-toned, a distant echo of her peals. Then she stopped, and the old man spoke as if startled. He cried out in son Giambattista's voice. The gun fell from his open hand, but the arm remained extended for a moment as if still supported. Linda seized it roughly. You are too old to understand. Come into the house. He let her lead him. On the threshold he stumbled heavily, nearly coming to the ground, together with his daughter. His excitement, his activity of the last few days had been like the flare of a dying lamp. He caught at the back of his chair. In son Giambattista's voice, he repeated in a severe tone. I heard him, Ribierist, the miserable. Linda helped him into the chair, and bending low, hissed into his ear, You have killed Giambattista. The old man smiled under his thick moustache. Women had strange fancies. "Where's the child?" he asked, surprised at the penetrating chilliness of the air and the unwonted dimness of the lamp by which he used to sit up half the night with the open Bible before them. Linda hesitated a moment, then averted her eyes. "She is asleep," she said. "We shall talk of her tomorrow." She could not bear to look at him. He filled her with terror and with an almost unbearable feeling of pity. She had observed the change that came over him. He would never understand what he had done, and even to her the whole thing remained incomprehensible. He said with difficulty, "Give me the book." Linda laid on the table the closed volume in its worn leather cover, the Bible given him years ago by an Englishman in Palermo. The child had to be protected, he said in a strange, mournful voice. Behind his chair, Linda wrung her hands, crying without noise. Suddenly, she stared for the door. He heard her move. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To the light," she answered, turning round to look at him balefully. "The light. See. Duty." Very upright, white-haired, leonine, heroic in his absorbed quietness, he felt in the pocket of his red shirt for the spectacles given him by Dona Emilia. He put them on. After a long period of immobility, he opened the book, and from on high looked through the glasses at the small print in double columns. A rigid, stern expression settled upon his features with a slight frown, as if in response to some gloomy thought of unpleasant sensation. But he never detached his eyes from the book while he swayed forward, gently, gradually, till his snow-white head rested upon the open pages. A wooden clock ticked methodically on the whitewashed wall, and growing slowly cold, the Garibaldino lay alone, rugged, undecayed, like an old oak uprooted by a treacherous gust of wind. The light of the Great Isabel burned unfailing above the lost treasure of the San Tome mine. Into the bluish sheen of the night without stars, the lantern sent out a yellow beam towards the far horizon. Like a black speck upon the shining panes, Linda, crouching in the outer gallery, rested her head on the rail. The moon, drooping in the western board, looked at her radiantly. Below, at the foot of the cliff, the regular splash of oars from a passing boat ceased, and Dr. Monygham stood up in the stern sheets. "Linda!" he shouted, throwing back his head. "Linda!" Linda stood up. She had recognized the voice. "Is he dead?" she cried, bending over. "Yes, my poor girl. I am coming round," the doctor answered from below. "Pull to the beach," he said to the rowers. Linda's black figure detached itself upright on the light of the lantern, with her arms raised above her head, as though she were going to throw herself over. "It is I who loved you," she whispered, with a face as set and white as marble in the moonlight. "I, only I. She will forget thee, killed miserably for her pretty face. I cannot understand, but I shall never forget thee. Never!" She stood silent and still, collecting her strength to throw all her fidelity, her pain, bewilderment, and despair into one great cry. "Never, Gian Battista!" Dr. Monygham, pulling round in the police galley, heard the name pass over his head. It was another of Nostromo's triumphs, the greatest, the most enviable, the most sinister of all. In that true cry of undying passion that seemed to ring aloud from Punta Mala to Azuera and away to the bright line of the horizon, overhung by a big white cloud shining like a mass of solid silver, the genius of the magnificent capataz de cargadores dominated the dark gulf containing his conquests of treasure and love. End of Part 3, Chapter 13. End of Nostromo by Joseph Conrad.